You know, I remember when I could fit all three of my sons into a wheelbarrow. Back in the day, you remember those days? Maybe some of your kids are in this place now where they're little and they're so fun, and you can fit three of them in a wheelbarrow. And then the next thing I know, I turn around and they look like this. And it's not like this should surprise me. I don't know why it surprised me, because everybody warns you about it. Everybody says, oh, they grow up fast, and it's what you want, right? It's you want your kids to get taller than you and stronger than you and faster than you and smarter than you and go farther than you and all of that, right? I tell myself I really think I do want that. But this day surprised me. It kind of just boom, there it was. And I shouldn't have been surprised, because it's not like I didn't have evidence that it was coming. I remember the days I used to run races with my oldest son, Micah. And this is what the finish line would look like. We'd run together, and I would run slow so that we could do that. And then we'd get to the end, and I'd congratulate him. And it was a good father-son thing to do. Or sometimes the finish looked like this, a proud moment with my son, and we ran this race together. And so I should have known things were changing when it began to look like this. I should have seen the evidence of change, but I remained in denial for years. I continued seeing things the old way. I don't know why. And there are times when your kids do things and you just don't even know, how do you respond to this thing the kid is doing? You look at it and you say, that's great, son. Way to go. If your symbols weren't so squiggly, it'd be even better. Is that a 2? These moments come, and God in His mercy knew I couldn't handle this kids growing up thing, and so He blessed us with a 4th son, and this is Levi. Levi has been such a blessing to me, to my family, and this is Levi just a few weeks ago on his way to school for the first day of school, his first day of kindergarten. So Levi is getting ready for school, but he's also getting ready for his world. And the question is, what will his world be like? What will his church look like? What will be normal for him? All that stuff that we consider normal, our cultures, our technologies, our ways of living out our faith. I need to tell you about a place where 20% of the babies die before their 5th birthday. It's a place where many young women get pregnant as teenagers, and most of these young women will watch at least one of their kids die. They die because of waterborne disease. They die because of a lack of food security. They die from preventable causes. And in this place, the average life expectancy is only 41 years. I'm talking about the United States of America. Only a few generations ago, that was what life was like. But then new technologies kick in. We have new transportation, new telecommunications, the invention of electricity, mechanized agriculture, automobiles, televisions, air travel, vaccines, satellites. I was born. The computer, modems, cell phones, servers, hybrid cars, and the pinnacle of all technology, the iPhone. We have come a long way. But sadly, that progress has not reached all of us yet. And I had this personal experience that confronted me with that truth. In Tanzania 7 years ago, I was director of Compassion's HIV/AIDS initiative in Africa. And the reason that I was in Tanzania specifically was because while our other East African countries were successfully procuring antiretroviral medicines, the drugs that stop HIV, we'd had some real struggles in Tanzania. And in this community, we had 53 children who were infected with HIV at birth and who needed those medicines or else they would die. And that is why I was visiting with Jacqueline, because she was one of those 53 children. She was born with HIV. She watched both her mother and her father die with this disease. It's an excruciating, brutal, and long death. And it's something that no child should have to endure seeing. And needless to say, when she then fell sick, after her parents died and she was taken into the home of her grandmother, and she was told, "You've got the sickness," she knew she would die like her parents. I knelt next to Jacqueline in that dirt. and I prayed for her. But I prayed with a hope and an optimism because just the day before we had succeeded. We'd finally found a clinic through which we could secure these medicines, and I knew that Jacqueline was one of those 53 kids that we were going to start that antiretroviral therapy the very next day. So I knelt in that dirt and I prayed that God, let these medicines bring her back because she had progressed very rapidly. And just as I'd seen with hundreds of other kids, I was praying, Lord, let us hear her sing, let's watch her play, let's see what you had in mind when you built her. And so the next day, she began the therapy at the clinic, and I headed back to the United States. And when I arrived back in the United States, it was 2 days later, I had a message from our Tanzania office saying, Jacqueline is dead. You see, we missed the opportunity to save her life, maybe by only a day. Those medicines, they require certain basic strength in the body, sort of like starting chemotherapy, and we'd gotten her there and we'd started, but we were too late. And that, I don't know why, it's been Jacqueline. I've been with a lot of kids who've died. I've been with a lot of kids who've been abused and abandoned through my work with compassion. But for some reason, it's Jacqueline's voice that I still hear, and it's her memory. I've had a lot of sleepless nights. And in those sleepless nights, there was one particular night where I was remembering her, and then there was sort of this strange shift where it felt like instead of remembering her, I sensed that she was present. And I know this might sound strange, but I made a promise that I will do whatever I can with whatever influence God grants to never be too late again. Not just for the kids with HIV, but for all of them. And that's really why I'm here. I'm here to honor that promise because I don't think we need to be too late. Every day, 21,000 children die of preventable causes, things like dirty water, malaria, vaccine-preventable diseases. These kids are among the 1.4 billion people living in extreme economic poverty. But let me interrupt us here and ask you something. What did you expect? A guy's going to come talk about extreme poverty. You probably expect to hear sad stories. You expect to hear bleak, overwhelming statistics, right? I mean, it's sort of what we expect to hear. Let me ask you a really important question. What are your expectations for the future of the poor? When your children are your age, do you think that they'll be sitting in a place like this hearing similar sad stories and bleak, overwhelming statistics? What are your expectations for the future of the poor? You know, I recently spoke at a pastor's conference, and I asked these pastors and church leaders, write down, this was before I spoke, I had these index cards on all the chairs. I said, write down one verse from the Bible about poverty or about the poor. Okay, you know, all these pastors, you know, I mean, there's hundreds of verses to choose from. Some people think there's thousands. And I'm wondering, what do you think is the most common, the most often remembered passage from Scripture about the poor? You want to guess the most common answer? You got it. The poor you will always have with you. I believe the misinterpretation of this verse anchors a fatalistic belief that poverty is an unsolvable human condition. It's just the way it is and probably always will be, right? Jesus said these words 3 days before his death. He said them at a party just after Mary had anointed him with a $45,000 jar of perfume. And Judas, the greedy little treasurer, he was there. He saw that and he said, why this waste? This perfume could have been sold and the money given to the poor. So Mary's act of lavish worship was attacked by the greed of the treasurer. So Jesus steps in and he says, leave her alone. You'll always have the poor with you, but you won't always have me. And Judas is just shocked by that. But wait a second, you will not always have me? But later he says, I will be with you always, even to the very end of the age. So which is it? Why don't we have that debate? Why do we take the first half of this sentence and say, this is an all-time proclamation to all of us, but we put the second half in context? I really think we need a debate about that because I think that we haven't looked closely to understand what Jesus really said there. Jesus did not say the poor will always be with us. He wasn't talking to us. He was rebuking Judas and defending Mary. He was saying, I'm about to die. You know, right after the earthquake in Haiti, a few days after that quake, I was in Haiti leading a medical response team. And I asked a Haitian man, do you think it's possible to end extreme poverty? He didn't hesitate. He said yes. And he went on to explain how he thought that could happen. I mean, if anybody on the planet who would be justified for having low expectations of the future or fatalistic kind of thoughts about that, wouldn't it be him?
A few months later, I'm in Ethiopia, in rural Ethiopia, That's a place that's seen famine and political oppression. And I asked this rural Ethiopian man, do you think it's possible to end extreme economic poverty? And he said, yes, no hesitation. There it was. I come back to the States, and I speak to agnostics and atheists who say, yes, it's possible to end extreme poverty in our generation. But when I go speak to church leaders and to guys like us, folks like us, I'm not sure it's really realistic, and aren't we all poor? And I'm not saying you shouldn't help the poor, but I just don't think it's going to come back to bite us if we kind of have those. Really? So I live in this tension. We are in a battle with our own low expectations, and I think if we're going to take that position, we just need to make sure we're right. We need to make sure that's really what Scripture teaches, or we need to make sure we've got some access to some data that, maybe other people haven't seen to see why we should be so, pessimistic. I don't think we should, and I'll show you why in a second. It is time for us to embrace our legacy. It is time for us to join with men like Martin Luther King Jr., who once said, "Human progress never rolls in on the wheels of inevitability. It comes through the tireless efforts of men willing to be co-workers with God." The data I'm about to show you will surprise you. It might even shock you. You'll wonder why you haven't seen them before.
Is it working? Is it really working? I mean, it's one thing to be faithful, but you kind of wonder, do you expect it to get better? And that's where I'd like to turn to that data that we showed earlier. I know you're like, church data? Are you kidding me? But it's okay. We're going to look at some data. It's inspiring data. It's encouraging data. And I'd like to show you just some of the things that are going on in the world that will begin with looking at life expectancy in the United States. Did you know that in 1900, the average life expectancy in the United States was only 49 years? How old are you? Today, the average life expectancy is 79 years. We have more than doubled the average length of our lives in the span of the 20th century, only 4 generations. That's incredible. But we kind of know about our progress. We know about our economic development and all of that. That may not surprise us too much. What about places like India or China? Did you know that in 1900, the average life expectancy in India was only 24 years? In China, it was 32? How old are you? I would definitely be dead, That's incredible. Some of you are thinking about college. I know Madeline should probably quit college. 24 years. Do something. Look at where we are today. In India, it's 64. In China, it's 73. These countries have more than doubled the average length of their lives in the span of the 20th century. What about Ethiopia? We're partnering with a church, Deborah Zed Kalahewit Church in Ethiopia. And Ethiopia has seen famine and political oppression and hardship. In 1900, Ethiopians had an average lifespan of 30 years, and today they're at 56. So even Ethiopia has nearly doubled the average length of their lives in the span of the 20th century. And a big part of the reason for that improvement in lifespan is improvement in child survival rates. We used to say that 40,000 children die every day from hunger and preventable disease, 40,000 every day. In the 1990s, that dropped to 33,000, and today we're down to 21,000. So we have cut in half the number of children who are dying from poverty-related causes, and we did that in just the span of a generation. A big part of the reason why more of these kids are surviving to celebrate their 5th birthday is because they now have access to safe drinking water. Waterborne disease used to be the number 1 killer of kids under 5. But just since 1990, 600 million people have gained access to safe drinking water. That's incredible progress. Another reason why more children are surviving and doing well is vaccine-preventable diseases. We invented a vaccine for measles about 50 years ago. And we've nearly eradicated it from the United States. But still, in the year 2000, 750,000 kids, 750,000 children died from measles in the year 2000. Not that long ago. But look what's happened since then. From 2000 to 2008, there's been a 78% reduction in the number of children dying from measles, simply because we're completing the work of immunizing those kids. Strategies that we know work, and they're working. What about malaria? Malaria seems like this massive, unsolvable problem. It kills about 1 million kids every year. Did you know that in only 6 years, between 2002 and 2008, 22 countries have cut their malaria rates in half? They did it through insecticide-treated nets and better medicines and spraying to kill mosquitoes. We used to have malaria in the United States. We pushed it off the shores of this country almost a century ago. And so those simple strategies that we know worked in our history are working, and even more advanced technologies are working to end malaria around the world, even as we speak. And many of you participate. Some of you, if anyone here was part of the 58 launch in January, we funded together 500 families receiving insecticide-treated nets in a part of Thailand that still is struggling with malaria. Simple strategies that work. These are all health indicators. I'll just share a few others real quickly. You know, we think about literacy and education and how important that is in society. In 1870, only 1 out of 4 people on the planet could read. By 1950, that was half of us, and now we're past 83%. So we are seeing improvements in literacy and education, and that leads and is associated with the rise of democracy around the world. What about food production? How many countries, what percentage of countries on the planet do you think were producing enough food to feed their own people in 1950? The answer is 44%. Less than half of the countries on the planet were producing enough food to feed their own citizens in 1950. Do you know where we are today? We're over 90%. And that's a result of fertilization and agricultural technologies and what we call the Green Revolution. And why does that really matter? Because look at what is happening to malnutrition rates. In only 1970, I was alive, 36% of the world's population was malnourished. In 1990, it dropped to 20%, and by 2004, we were down to 16%. We are making incredible progress. And it's on just about every front that you look at. Yes, you hear stories that are the exceptions. You hear about the North Koreas, the Sudans. Those situations do exist. But when you look at the world as a whole, there's pretty much no region and no area of development where we're not seeing incredible progress. But I'm only going to highlight one more number, but it's massive. In 1981, 52% of the world's population lived in extreme economic poverty, life on less than $1.25 a day. 1981. Half of us in extreme economic poverty. But today we're at 26%. We have cut in half the percentage of people living in extreme economic poverty, and we made that progress in the span of only a generation. The question is, what will it take to get to zero? What will it take to lift the last 26%? The answer is His church. The answer is right here. It's in the example that you're demonstrating. It's in the way that you're living out your faith. And what I'm seeing around the world is an awakening. It's an awakening to the whole world. I mean, we have a couple million people traveling every year overseas now, mission trips and stuff like that, having a personal encounter, not just with the issue of poverty and the realities of it, but with people. And they're building relationships. And so poverty has gone from being this abstract, distant, far away thing to people. People that they see the smile. They stand side by side and worship in the same church. They begin to take on a face and a name, and then before you know it, that changes everything. I don't know how many of you have been somewhere and come back and said, my life is different now. I want to tell you just one story as I close. During the filming of 58, the quarry, we spent 4 days in that quarry, and I got to tell you, each day that I walked through those gates, I was asking God, how is it that we're even here? How is it that we're able to walk through the gates of this quarry? I mean, this is an illegal quarry. This kind of labor for children is illegal in India. The quarry was illegal geologically, and it's not like we're inconspicuous, coming in, these honking cameras and everything. And there we are, 4 days of watching these kids hammer away at those rocks. And I kept feeling angry. And I was asking lots of quarry workers questions, interviewing, kind of learning, what's this like? And on the end of the 4th day, I'm sitting on the rock next to this guy. His name's Jay Raj, and I'm asking him about his story. He says his father was a quarry worker, and he had a debt, and he couldn't repay it, and he inherited that, and so he grew up working in the quarry. And I asked him about his family, and he said that he had a son, and that his son got cancer, and he had to borrow more money from the quarry owner in order to pay for his son's medical care, and his son died. And then he told me he had a daughter. And every other guy that I'd ask about daughters, what they said was fear. What they described was anxiety. They said, I just hope that I can get enough money for the dowry. I want her husband's family to respect her and treat her well. And I want her to get married as soon as possible. Well, this guy had a totally different answer about his daughter. I said, tell me about her. He said, oh, well, she's my hope for the future, and I want her to be an educated woman, and I don't want her to get married young. And, he had all of this incredible enthusiasm about his daughter. And so I'm looking at the kids that are still in the choir. I said, so which one is she? And he said, oh, she's not here. Really? Where's she at? Well, she just got out of school, and she's at this project. Now, listen, we weren't in that quarry as Compassion. We were in as Prospect Arts. We were filming, but nobody had any idea what we were filming or why. And I'm asking this question of this man, and he says that his daughter's not there because she was able to go to school. So obviously I'm thinking, how is that possible for you? And I asked, and he said, well, she's part of a program. There's this church that pays her school fees and helps her. The program's called Compassion. And I just had this, these chills, like, that's so encouraging, because it's been really hard being in this quarry, seeing these kids, and to know that there's at least one kid not in this quarry because Compassion is there equipping a local church. It was very encouraging. And then I asked, so what's her name? And he said, 58. I said, no, her name. Like, I didn't even hear, what are you talking? He said 58 again. I asked a third time. He said 58. This is through a translator, so I'm like the translator. So what, help explain. I had these goosebumps. I still get these goosebumps when I remember this moment. Talking back and forth with Jay Rush, child number 58 from the Compassion Project. Her real name's Soundarya. And you all got to see her last night. I'm thinking, God, what does it mean that Isaiah 58 is embodied in the daughter of a quarry worker? What does this mean? And I believe what it means is that Isaiah 58 is being lived out by that local church, because for this girl, she will not face a future in bonded labor. She will not break stones, because the local church took action to protect her, action to provide opportunities for her. And that's what Isaiah 58 is all about. It's that action to release the chains of oppression, to release the oppressed. And the local church was living that out. And for Soundarya to be the embodiment of that, it's just beautiful. And it was such an affirmation from God. And as I was wrestling, God, how are we through the gates of this quarry? The answer I kept hearing back was, I have heard the prayers of these children, and you are here to be stewards of their story. I want my people around the world to know, and you bear the weight of that testimony. And that weight has been borne by a small team here. And now it's being borne by all of us together. It is time to take the stories that you know about, to take the testimonies that you know about, and bring them before the people of God who are ready to respond. Because God is awakening his people. He is awakening his church for this time to do something unprecedented in history. And that's a hard burden, because as much as we celebrate Soundarya, as much as that just brings joy, the sense that God has worked through this ministry, through this local church, and into this girl's life, while we celebrate, we feel a great tension, because we're still grieving about the fact that Gopi is still in the quarry. And we can't rest. David said this last night. People ask me if I'm tired. I've been doing a lot lately. So they say, are you tired? I'm like, tired. What does that even have to do with it? He has a reason to be tired. Look at us. Look at where God has put us. He's given us everything. He's given us influence. He's given us opportunity. We cannot get tired. He's called us to a fight. And I, for one, am going to fight that fight until my last breath. And it's too important to let anything get in the way of that. It's too important. For all of the process and the difficulty and the relationships and our own sinful natures, we have got to slough off everything else that's hindering us so that we can run this race He has marked out for us to run. Because there's got to be a day in the future when all the gopis in this world who are enslaved or held back by whatever structure, by whatever form of oppression, that can be broken. Until the day comes when the gopis of the world have the opportunities of the Levis of the world. We're going to keep working for that day. This continues with you. Because it's time for leadership. It's time for leadership. The church is awakening, and there is a need for leadership. And you do not have to go searching for that leadership because it's here in this room. You can look around this room and you will see it. You will feel it. This is why God called you. This is why He commissioned you. This is why you're at your post. This is why you do what you do, to offer that experience and wisdom and leadership to the global church as she is awakening to this unprecedented and exciting opportunity of our day. It continues with you. And don't be afraid of that. Are we not children of the living God? Don't we have His Holy Spirit in us and working through us? I'm not ready either. But the time has come. We have been encircling an enemy. We have been closing in on that enemy quietly, and we've been gaining ground. But as Wes said on Monday, we're not under the radar anymore. The time has come, and we are going loud. This battalion, this special ops force within the kingdom is bringing a fight to the enemy. And I know some of you are peaceful types. You're like, I'm not too comfortable with the war metaphors. I'm like, you know what? Get over it. We're at war. We are at war. We have a very serious enemy, and we cannot take that in any trivial way. The time has come. We have to shake off our sins and be brave.